Get ready to plunge into the electrifying world of tech news with the Next Tech Check podcast. Hosted by SmartTech Research's Mark Vena and NextCurve's Leonard Lee. This podcast offers bold insights, controversial debates, and monitors the pulse of innovation. It's the only podcast committed to keeping what's next in tech in check.
Hi, everyone. My name is Mark Vena, CEO and Principal Analyst at SmartTech Research, and this is Leonard Lee, Founder and Executive Analyst at NextCurve. Welcome to the Next Tech Check podcast. Today is Thursday, June 13th, 2024. Good afternoon, Leonard. We've now kind of survived the big Apple WWDC thing, but what's been going on in your life before we hit the topics we want to chat about?
Oh man, a lot of stuff. I recently came back from Taipei. I was there for Intel's Tech Tour 2024, and then the subsequent week, of course, Computex 2024, and spent a lot of time with a lot of chip makers and OEMs, and it's just been a deluge, just a biblical flood of information and experiences and learning, and my brain is fried. And then we have WWDC, right? And,
well, it's interesting.
It's crazy.
You and I were on the Qualcomm analyst call this morning, and one of the questions I teed up right up front, and I was probably reading your mind, is that the call that we had this morning was kind of post Apple, post WWDC. So it's always interesting to ask what the reactions, a vendor's reaction is after an event.
Sure.
At Computex, since Computex preceded WWDC, was there did you get a sense that that the various vendors you were talking to were, you don't name names, but that they were, a lot of interest, hey, what is Apple going to unveil at WWDC? Yeah. Could you maybe provide a little bit of color on that before the WWDC thing?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. And I'd like to get your take as well. I'm sure you're observing, and it's always interesting to see how folks who are not on the ground are perceiving things, right? Because at Computex, I'll tell you, AI PC was what everyone was talking about.
Yeah.
Center stage, obviously, I think it was pretty obvious it was Qualcomm. I mean, they're coming in, setting the benchmark. Coming off of the announcement at that pre-announcement at Microsoft Build 2024, which it was in many ways a shocker, right? Because usually it's a Wintel go-to-market. Yeah. Now all of a sudden we have Qualcomm with their ARM-based proprietary. It's their implementation in ARM ESA. In Orion, the Orion CPUs, but they're, this whole AI PC Copilot Plus offering tied to Qualcomm Snapdragon X series. So, I think I know that it was something that everyone else, in particular the x86 world, took notice to. And so, I think Qualcomm was put in a very enviable position as being sort of this belle of the ball, as I call it.
Right.
But that's not to say that there weren't some really interesting and compelling offerings coming from AMD and Intel. I mean, I think Lunar Lake is super interesting. They're coming in with a lot of tops on the MPU, right, which a lot of people talked about, right, as well as the GPU, and they're also going to be loading in a power efficient set of CPU cores. It's for efficiency plus for performance core configuration that might turn out to be really, really interesting, because at the end of the day, this whole AI PC thing, which is really related to or targeting the ultra light laptop form factors, is going to boil down to battery life, right?
Yeah.
and being able to handle
Which,
these
by the
wonderful.
way, Qualcomm is performing quite nicely if you believe some of the data that they've provided. And I'm
Sure,
actually
sure.
I'm actually getting a Snapdragon X Elite unit. I wouldn't say who the vendor is because
Yeah,
I don't want to
yeah.
embarrass them quite yet. But that's the kind of thing I'm looking at. But the thing that's
Oh,
interesting.
maybe it's not embarrassed, right?
Well,
Maybe it's like
no,
flatter.
no, because I'll have another visit. Well, why didn't you use my unit, for whatever
Yeah,
write-up you're going to do on it? But the thing that's interesting
yeah,
is, if I recall, Cristiano at Computex made a prediction that Snapdragon or call it ARM-based solutions will be the majority mix of PCs. I think he said within 5 years, or did he say 3 years? It was a pretty bold prediction.
yeah.
And the thing is that who would have believed that if I had made that prediction a year ago or 2 years
Mhm.
ago,
Mhm.
pre Snapdragon X Elite, you'd probably say, Mark, I think you're smoking something. And so
Yeah,
it's interesting how the world has changed. And by the way, the stars are starting to align. You've got
yeah,
Microsoft now with a much more robust ARM version of Windows 11, which,
yeah,
by the way, you need to have that because you've got business, corporate customers, enterprise customers that are not going to accept anything less. It can't be, well, it kind of works. It's kind of compatible with
yeah,
most x86 applications. And I think they've pretty much closed the gap on that. So no, I agree with you. I think that right now the wind is at the back of Qualcomm. They've done a very
yeah.
good job, but we should really get into what we want to talk about here. And obviously, before we go into the Apple stuff, I want to remind people to subscribe and like our podcast. Here we've got our QR codes for you to go off and do that. But just a little bit of housekeeping here to make sure that if you want to watch this every week, this is a great way to get reminders. So
Yep.
let's talk about right off the bat. I've got, and these are a little bit of an eye chart here, but it's essentially the platform piece. We're going to talk about the Apple Intelligence component in a second, but I will say,
Mm.
watching the keynote, which was, I think, one of the better keynotes. Not that they're not all good, but some are better than others. And obviously there was high expectations for this one, and some stuff did leak out prior to the
Sure.
keynote. What I was impressed with is the flow. They did a pretty nice job of saying, hey, here's all the enhancements we're making to iPad OS,
Sure.
iOS, Mac OS, Sequoia. They always have that little game. Hey, our crack marketing team is now focusing on the code on that. That's kind of a gag that they pull out every year. But they were making hints about some of the AI capabilities, during that first first hour of the presentation. And then, Craig and Tim came up and they did the kind of the deeper dive on Apple Intelligence. And I thought that was really smart because people, watch WWDC for the updates, but now this is a big deal. And I think you and I both agree that the way Apple's going to implement this is really going to set a benchmark, I think. But what was your take, just before we get into the Apple Intelligence portion, some of the interface changes, some of the tweaks they were making? I know you're a big fan of we finally have a calculator app on iPad, and it's, by the way, and it's pretty damn cool.
Yeah, yeah.
We got an Apple Pencil. But what are your thoughts, at least at a platform level, before we get into the Apple Intelligence component?
Yeah. To tell you the truth, I thought it was kind of pedestrian. In certain points in the presentation, I was a little concerned. It's like, okay, Apple, you got to up your game here, and especially if you're going to tell the AI story, it needs to pop a little bit. And so I thought a lot of the presentation in the beginning with, even with Vision Pro or Vision OS, seemed kind of okay. Yeah, these are like really narrow, small little things. How are you guys stitching together the AI piece? And quite frankly, I don't think that they, one of the emphasis, the good thing that I think they did, though I think it's something that people just don't pick up on, is a lot of the AI stuff that they've been doing for years, right?
Right.
And so the good thing is that they sprinkled a bunch of that through these presentations as they're going through the different platform OSs. And that sort of worked, right? but I guess the sad thing is that you need to speak directly about AI, right? Use that term. Otherwise, people just don't get it. I mean, for years and years, Apple, Qualcomm, these two companies in particular have been talking about AI, and it's fallen on deaf ears, right? And they've been discounted for the work that they do. And so, the run up to Apple Intelligence, I think they may have been able to do a better job, and maybe that would have been to be a little bit more direct, right, and add gravity to some of the functions that they're bringing to the table, but frame it with a sort of an AI first kind of narrative approach.
Yeah, I'll take a bit of a contrarian view on that. I think the first of all, expectations were quite high, so you're probably not going to satisfy anybody. To be in all fairness to Apple,
Yeah.
but I look at it from the perspective, Leonard, that I think they were very smart in terms of defining use cases, especially when you got into Apple Intelligence, that were not groundbreaking, but they were. I think they're concerned, and I wrote about this early in the week. I think they're a bit concerned about the fact that most, not you, not me, not the analysts we hang out with. We're the kind of folks, we'll try anything. We're the first to early adopt technology. I've seen some studies out there that only 10% of mainstream users are using applications like ChatGPT. Yes, people talk about it, but it's not a mainstream application for most people.
Well, and that's interesting that you say that, because the assumption is that it is, and there's a lot of
perspective, and that's wrong from a data standpoint. That's wrong.
Right. I mean, even in OpenAI's presentation, or that event that they had for I think it was Google I/O, they're still at 10 million active users.
Right.
And, of course, people are going to sit there and say, well, you're not counting the API stuff. Well, it's still
a modest number.
Right. I mean, let's face it, even on the internet, the web, nobody pays for anything. That's why you have Google. And that's how Google makes money, is through ads to subsidize everybody's use of, quote unquote, the internet.
Right.
And that same model likely applies to all these ChatGPT-ish blah, blah, blah chatbots, right? And for that user base basically to stagnate is quite telling, right?
Yeah, right. So I guess the perspective is, just getting back to the Apple component of this discussion, is that since the sizzle is and the perception that everybody and their brother is using ChatGPT like applications, that's factually wrong. So I think what Apple's trying to do is to convince mainstream users. And again, we're hopping around right into the Apple Intelligence thing. Mm-hmm. My thing is, I am sure there's been a dialogue with an Apple saying to convince the mainstream user that using these contextual AI applications, and they have a bifurcated strategy, as you know. I mean, they've partnered with ChatGPT for external content, and they're largely leveraging their own servers for accessing iMessages and your email stack. Because I think they're really concerned about privacy. I mean, at the end of the day, it's nifty that I can take with a new version of iMessages, I'll be able to do a summary of a long string of text messages that gives, it might be, 10,000 words, or an article in Safari, and I can get a summary very quickly. I think a lot of consumers like, well, if I'm having a personal dialogue with my family about personal finances, I'm not sure I want that information up in the clead.
Yeah. Well, definitely what we see from Apple, and by the way, I think they were the first ones to talk about on-device AI before generative AI. Okay. So they have really been a pioneer. I mean, people are gonna, the other parties are going to give Apple a hard time about their privacy stance. They're going to say they're just privacy washing, but prove it. because their products are designed with that in mind. And then
Right.
taking this on device AI point of view and approach, and being able to do it. Now, if this whole private cloud compute, um, uh, you know, uh, framework or architecture that they talked about and introduced works, and when deployed at some point, when they release, the new generation of platform OSs and Apple Intelligence along with it, if this stuff works, they are going to leapfrog everybody.
Yes,
This is a very, very important thing.
I agree with you 100%.
Yeah.
So that was
And
kind of
there,
snuck in there, but the reality is this is kind of a business
right.
business.
But
Well,
how
yeah, it is
many
kind of a business
people
model
get
change.
that?
Mhm.
There's not a lot of people who
No.
even understand what hybrid AI is, much less edge AI. And so the broader community out there, or the audiences out there, the general public are not going to know this. But this is a big, big deal.
Deal.
I think even the bigger deal, maybe it's not the bigger deal, but another really, really big deal and take for me was they trained their own model. As far they did not go and take anything from OpenAI or
Yeah.
anyone else or Google.
They're
They
leveraging
create
their
their
own
own models. So they have
yeah.
their own large language model. They have their own diffusion model, and that's going to be they're going to probably have
Right.
a larger version of it running up in their private compute, cloud compute, and then a much smaller condensed version of apparently a 4-bit precision version, highly condensed and optimized, running on device.
Yeah. So I think you and I are in violent agreement. I think the thing that I think Apple realizes, you only have one chance with mainstream consumers, and once something gets all this. Well, first of all, there could be an argument made that a lot of the jazzy, bright shiny object applications of Gen AI and AI in general, it doesn't excite consumers. It frustrates them, but it kind of like, so what?
Confuses them. Yeah,
Right.
exactly. I think they're generally indifferent.
Yeah, there's a skepticism part. Now, having said that, though, I think and I think you and I violently agree about this, is that they realize that once, and it's going to happen at some point. Maybe it happens. Hey, maybe it happens on Apple's watch for all we know. But obviously, they've put protections in place to prevent that from happening with this private cloud initiative piece. But the point I'm making is that once there's the first compromise, where, oh, you know what, somehow a bunch of, you talk about, hacks and breaches where someone's passwords get compromised or account information gets compromised. Once people's threads about, oh, here's a bunch of thousands and thousands of threads of messages that are summarized on personal information, I think that people will get really, really skeptical about, hey, do I really want to do it?
Yeah, and I think it's already happened just simply because of that this Copilot Plus fiasco, where Microsoft had to backtrack because quite honestly, I was surprised to look at the list of things that they are going to now incorporate into Copilot Plus. It's like, well, how come you guys didn't think of this before? And so that did a real disservice, I think, to everybody, where now all of a sudden you have this heightened level of skepticism and suspicion about tech companies and their dedication to privacy. And I think that kind of that skepticism kind of bled into WWDC, where people by default thought, well, are you guys really protecting our privacy? And does this stuff actually work, right? Because you would have assumed when Copilot Plus was announced that Microsoft had thought through all of the privacy and responsible AI and safe AI considerations. But if you look at that list, it's actually quite shocking. They didn't even consider some of the fundamentals.
Yes.
And that, if Apple replicates that, they're going to be in big trouble. That's going to be a huge brand killer because they've anchored their brand on privacy first for a very long time, ever since they put that huge billboard up at CES. I think it was 2016 16 or
I
17.
remember that. Yes.
Yeah, and and we've even at that time they were going, hey guys, let's be thoughtful about technology. And I agree with you. They didn't talk about reliable AI. I think that was a missed opportunity. Although there's some interviews that I saw afterwards and some disclosures and things that I read, but they didn't put that front and center. They just kind of assumed that everyone would assume that this stuff works. And what we've seen for the past 2 years, a year and a half with the advent of ChatGPT is these things have serious reliability issues, even if you ground them,
Yes.
right?
Well,
And so
I'm not
we're not immune from this stuff. So where are the tools? Where are the things for governance and AI governance and all this stuff that developers can use to ensure that what they're developing for customers, right, are
I really think,
reliable.
Leonard, I'm actually kind of glad that they didn't go overboard with making promises in that department, because first of all, if you read some of the follow up after WWDC, it's not that they walked back certain things, but a lot of the features and capabilities are not going to be available on day one. They're going to roll this stuff out in a fairly staggered way, and I think they're doing that for a couple of reasons. I think they're concerned about some of this stuff not performing quite the way it's supposed to.
Yeah.
I mean, for example, one of the things I'm very excited about is a Siri infused with Apple Intelligence voice assistant, where you can have multiple commands in a single statement from a smart home standpoint. That's been kind of the dream. Hey, let me make a statement and in a single statement, turn the lights on, set the thermostat. I could do that in a single statement. I mean, we're not there yet. Will this perform the way it's supposed to? The other thing I want to get your reaction to, and this is really important because it goes to Apple's built-in advantage with 50% of the market in smartphones, is they keep talking like contextual AI, the ability to understand your environment. And for example, they use the example that, hey, if I'm using Siri for information about a hike, but previously I asked a question about a specific geographic area that I want to hike in, it already would know that you asked that question before. So it would, if you're asking for a plan or asking for maps, you wouldn't have to repeat that same same request. That's a big deal. And when you talk about their, again, this is one of the issues that the Dells of the world, the Lenovo's of the world, the x86 PC world, is that since they have 0% market share in smartphones, they don't have that component where your smartphone you're carrying that with you 24/7 and it's collecting information. I'm not talking about the privacy issues. We could talk about it a little bit later, but they're all in on, hey, Apple's going to leverage the fact that it's got a big chunk of market share, and they can provide a more immersive AI experience across all of these devices. Your PC, your Mac, your tablet, your watch, the whole deal. And I think that's a big advantage.
No, it's huge. I mean, it's AI continuity. So it's taking continuity that they already have. And then, I mean, see, this is the thing. It's just a natural fabric of what Apple has been doing for years. It's their software stack, their whole integrated stack. And I've said this in another podcast. One of the things that they've proven is that all of this generative AI stuff that everyone's talking about, AI stuff, let's just call it AI stuff, that everyone seems to getting excited about, is just largely just chatbot, chatbot framework stuff. And so, I've said this before with Copilot. When they first introduced it, it's like, look, this is just chatbot framework. And, instead of, the old conversational, NLP bit, you're replacing it with the natural language understanding layer, and that's your LLM, right? And that's kind of what we're seeing here. And so the reason why you're seeing all these guys seemingly move so quickly is simply because all they're doing is rehashing a lot of stuff that they already have, and then just kind of plugging in, creating plugins for an LLM or a Gen AI engine of some sort to these already existing functions. And when you look at Apple Stack, they already have almost everything you need to create a chatbot, right?
Yes.
Because this is what we're really talking about. And
Yep.
what we're seeing with Apple's platform, OSs, is they're slowly making this kind of progression toward, a chatbot, and
Yeah.
then now an quote unquote agent. And actually, Apple's really close to that with these app intents, right? Which is, foundation of it really is shortcuts. So they're bringing all this stuff together that already existed and framing it. And again, going back to the core of Apple Intelligence is their own natural, large language model and diffusion model that they're using for basic, some of these basic Gen AI functions and services, and that, I think, that's what we're looking at here. But it's also, it's kind of at the same time a statement that, hey, look, um, this might not all be that big of a deal at the end of the day. And I'm not just talking about for Apple, for everybody.
No, I agree. Yeah, I mean, I found it refreshing, frankly, that the Apple Intelligence component and was really focused on very practical, compelling usage models. And I really they didn't come up with. In fact, when you talk about photo editing, a lot of stuff was rinse and repeat that was announced at Google I/O. Although strangely enough, because I'm sure you saw the Sundar presentation, Google I/O. You look at the comparisons between the two, and their the Google presentations come across much more complex and technically convoluted than what Apple does. And I'm not saying that what they announced wasn't compelling, but there are certain features, and this is classic Apple, which have been in the public domain for years sometimes. And then when Apple comes along, they almost put the good housekeeping seal of approval on it, and people get it. I know exactly what the capability does.
Yeah.
So, I mean, there was some kind of, I wouldn't say copycat, but there was a lot of, especially in the image editing stuff, there was some stuff that, oh, well, that's already been, executed by Google with their play.
I mean, but I think those types of things are those are the trivial things, right? Well, Google already had it. Like, okay, whatever. What are the bigger themes? What are the bigger deals that are happening? And see, this is what a lot of people have missed through the years and generations of all these devices. They focus on the minutia. They don't look at the big deals, right? So the big deal is the edge AI stuff, that the hybrid AI stuff that they're going to likely realize. It's not, hey, maybe they'll do it. No, if they present it, they almost certainly will deliver.
Yes.
Right? That is Apple. They don't sit there and go, hey, this is a preview, and maybe this will come out, but we're going to show you some our research, and then try to impact perception of the brand with these kind of far-fetched statements. Because if you go and you look at what other people are presenting, a lot of it is like R&D stuff. They'll even say it on stage, this is early R&D. But the thing that should bother everyone else out there, all the other players, is that Apple is going to come to market with this stuff, and knowing their track record, it's going to come to market with quality and efficacy. It's going to have value.
And it's not to say they won't trip over themselves, because they have from time to time.
From time to time, yeah.
But their big deal internally, because you and I are on the same page about this, is that they tend to have high fidelity to doing things in a very high quality way. And sometimes, especially when we get into these bold new areas like AI, there's so much hyperbole and excitement and again, bright shiny object stuff that it tends to turn off people who are, like, for example, I mean, one thing we should talk about, we have a few moments left here, is that, one of the things that didn't go unnoticed by me, and it certainly probably didn't go unnoticed by you, is that to take advantage of all this AI, Apple Intelligence goodness, you're going to have an iPhone 15 Pro or an iPhone 16 when that comes along down the pike in September. Now, iPhone 15s and the 16s are north of $1,000. You're going to have, again, in these, I won't say challenge, I'm going to sound like a broken record, in these challenging economic times, $1,000 is a lot of money for the average person to splurge on anything. So so they really have to hit a home run and get the chatter once the iPhone, once they get this stuff deployed in September, when all these platforms get released, they've got to get some buzz. Hey, by the way, you know what? I can do these 2 or 3 things that I couldn't do with an iPhone 14 or before, because they, Apple iPhone sales have been sluggish at best, like the rest of the smartphone industry. So I think they see, this particularly as kind of a kick in the pants if they can execute on what they talked about at WWDC. So there's a business component to it as well.
Yeah, but they also have that holistic scope, right, across devices as well, up to the cloud now, right, with private cloud compute, and that's a luxury others really don't have. Right? So if you look at, in terms of like Samsung, right, they came out with that Galaxy AI. Their motivation is going to be, how do we keep things on device as much as possible, and their dilemma is going to be, well, how do we monetize this stuff?
Right.
Apple has, I think, a flexibility or the option of being able to, because if they get this hybrid AI model and infrastructure framework service, right, for Apple Intelligence down, they can provide Apple Intelligence as a service to older generation users, right? Because basically what you're doing is you're providing a AI offload to the cloud for these devices that don't have an NPU that is, of minimal spec, right? And so Apple can charge for that. And so folks who really want the functionality could just tap the SaaS service or the generative AI as a service and then benefit. And then, I think here's the other thing that I haven't heard a lot of people talk about is the benefit to the developers. Having all this compute, all this generative AI capability on device, tooling, and the flexibility of being able to deploy your applications and leverage Apple's, hybrid AI infrastructure could be a huge boon for developers, right? And because it lowers their cost to serve their customers, right? And for those developers out there who complain about the fee, well, that comes at a cost. This stuff is not cheap. It doesn't happen for free. Right. And so it's another bullet point, at least for Apple, to say, hey, look, we invest in technologies and frameworks that help our developers stay ahead of everyone else in our ecosystem.
Yes.
And then also, comparatively, we're going to be able to lower the cost for our developers to serve customers who are Apple users.
Right. No, that's very much.
I think that's going to be really, really.
No, I agree with that. That's an inside baseball observation that if you're a developer, by working with Apple, because Apple is, taking on quite a burden with their own internal servers and approaching this with their private cloud announcement. That if you're a developer, you know what? A lot of developers are not crazy sometimes about selling apps through the App Store because of the fee structure. But you know what? If Apple's providing a much more secure experience and they're assuming that cost, well, guess what? Maybe that's worth that's worth maybe a little bit less margin from an app sales standpoint. So no, I agree with that.
And for those who don't like it, there's always WebRTC, and you can go and build your own stuff.
Right. No, I agree with that.
There's your easy answer. Yeah.
Well, we could talk about this for hours. And
I know.
We got to keep it. We're over the 30-minute limit because we want to keep this watchable. But anyway, Leonard, thanks. It's always great chatting with you.
Yeah, it's good catching up, man. It's been a lot too long.
And we'll be talking about this again. For our viewing and listening audience, thanks for making the Next Tech Check podcast part of your day or commute. Please make sure that you hit the like and subscribe buttons at the end of today's podcast, or use these on-screen QR codes to connect with us. You can follow both Leonard and I on X at the handles below. And until next time, have a great week and have a great weekend, Leonard. Thank you.
All right. Take care.